because it goes so deeply into their psyche, into adulthood, you realize that actually you've got a real tough job to do with men as they move from childhood to adulthood, who are trying to operate in the world out there and can't. They can't function. They can't function properly. They don't know why they can't function. So sort of going back to the purpose of Catholic Man UK, we do sense that we need to go back to the younger men, and in even trying to go back to 18 to 25-year-olds, you're probably dealing with young men who are really, really struggling to understand the world and themselves and how they coexist.
Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Catherine Bennett.
And I'm Mark Lambert.
And joining us today is our friend Samuel Baker, founder, co-founder and director of Catholic Man UK. So Sam, we thought we'd start by asking you about that. What led to the founding of this venture with James Letherland, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Bit of a long story in some respects, both kind of in terms of years. James and I met when we were students a long time ago, post, let's say, slightly older students, mature students. And we started a Catholic youth group in Luton, where we were both sort of based at that particular point in time. And then as we sort of moved on and got married and had families and went to separate parishes, he's more up Northamptonshire way, I'm in Bedfordshire. I was certainly looking around my church and he around his as well, and such a lack of men our age, men with families, men married with young kids. It felt quite lonely. And there were one or two guys I'd nod to, say hello to, and eventually I was like, so I'm going to put a little card together. So I created like a little business card and handed them out and said to the few guys that were there, why don't we meet up in a pub? Here's my number. And I think at the time I was quite influenced by the Catholic Gentleman over in the States and other men's groups that were coming through in the States. And he was doing that kind of whole black and white, old style pictures of men, bowler hats and the like. So I kind of did it along those lines to get men to sort of meet up. And initially it was social, and then I felt it needed a little bit of spiritual input. And we started to get a few speakers. And while there might only have been maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of us, it seemed worth doing. It kind of then became a little more social than spiritual, a lot more going out to the pub. And then our wives got to know each other and we went out as families or as couples. And at one point I thought, look, we do need to grab this by the scruff of the neck and maybe have something like a real framework for it. So our first conference was in 2017. And I opened up to a few more friends, family, the wider parish, and perhaps we had about, I think there's some good numbers, maybe even 30 even back in that day. And we followed that up the next year with a pilgrimage to Walsingham. And there we met a few guys from the Midlands, and they were like, oh, this seems a thing. Why don't you set up a Facebook page or a Facebook group? And this was 2018, and it seemed really exciting at the time that we did, and the numbers came in via Facebook and offline as well. And before we knew it, James and I had a sort of another group on our hands, and it was really good in some ways. And for me, I think it had some real personal benefits. Friendships were formed. It gave me some distractions from a tough job teaching, as you well know, Catherine. And I quite enjoyed this sense of purpose. And I took some cues from the American men's groups, which was, a lot of it was, hey, we've got a mission and men need to be this and do that. And there was quite a sense of momentum around it. So that's the potted history of it. It then kind of came to a bit of an end in COVID, at least face to face. And we went online and we did things online. And we've had since then perhaps a little bit of a breather. But we sort of sense that momentum is gathering again.
I just pulled your website up there, Sam. This is if people want to find out more, it's this. Is it Catholic Man UK, or what's the name of
Well,
the website?
they can still get to it via the URL catholicman.uk. But we've also taken what's been our long-standing motto. The Latin is agere sequitur esse, which is action follows being. And it's this sense that the way we are created and the purpose we're created for determines how we should act. And if we move away from, or if we carry out actions that move away from our being, we find that they're aberrations. We struggle with purpose in our lives. And so we're trying to return back to that. Catholic Man UK still is there as the name. But I think we're sort of fixing our next few years, perhaps, hopefully, on more direct about what it means to be a man, and therefore to carry out manly actions. And we can talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah, it's interesting, this whole conversation. I'll hand over to you two men in a second, but just because Charlie Kirk's obviously just died, and his death, I wasn't hugely familiar with Charlie Kirk. I knew of him, but it's just one more podcast or something to watch, and there's only so much time in a day. But his death has prompted me to look back at some of his videos, and I was watching him in the discussion and debate Q&A to Oxford University just earlier today, and there was something so wonderfully refreshing about him. He just was a strong man standing there in a suit, smart, well turned out, and speaking unashamedly, no coyness or awkwardness, about being a man, getting married, being a father, leading, providing, protecting. And there was, you could almost see sort of slight sniggers and looking, because this is just, people just don't hear this from men. Even if they hear men say, oh, I'm getting married and it's a good thing, there's always a slight kind of, but you know, you're, maybe it's not for you, or you're free. And he was just like, no, this is what you do, this is what it means to be a man. And I think he's been and maybe his death has prompted this, you know, this kind of interest in his work, and people are, he's a good model, isn't he? He's a good role model.
Very much. And I feel a sense of inspiration. I think that echoes what a lot of other people have said, and a lot of other men have said, that this capacity to speak outright and direct the truth. A couple of years ago, when Mark joined us at our conference, and I think, Mark, you gave me a little bit of a prod. Come on, Sam, what are you doing? What are you doing, Catholic Man UK? Where's it going? And at the time, personally, I wasn't in a particularly good frame of mind about where even my life had been heading. I'd stopped teaching. I'd moved into a new career. That was taking up a lot of time and energy and bandwidth. But I was also not quite certain where Catholic Man UK was going and what the need was exactly among men and how I could help fulfill that. And I think I remember saying to you, Mark, I felt a little bit like Jonah and the whale, that I knew that I needed to be doing something. And I was prevaricating for some reason. And I do think I needed a bit of time, a bit of space, a bit of time to think. But what Charlie Kirk's death has done is galvanized. I think it's that, I don't want to diminish what happened to him, but it was a kick up the backside. I think it has been for a lot of people. His mantra was very clear, to men in particular: get married, have babies, leave a legacy. And when I look back over what we have talked about with Catholic Man UK, that very much has been the theme, because it's universal. If you think long and hard about it and you ponder, that is what men are meant to do. And we have been so sidelined over the last few years and decades even. And men have been pushed to one side. And as we can see, the legacy is starting to crumble. We're not leaving anything for those coming after us. And I do feel that this now is the favorable time, and now is the time. And I'm quite glad that you've invited me on, because I think this is part of the momentum that's been gathering, that we have to reclaim very overtly, and at the cost of whatever it might be, the divinely ordained duties that have been given to men, that because God has imbued those in our masculinity, we cannot avoid. And if we avoid, we find ourselves mentally, physically, in a place that we shouldn't be. because we're diverging away from our true nature. And I think perhaps to just sort of wrap that particular thought up, I think we as men have been scared by what the backlash would be if we stood up and did that individually and alone. And yet I looked at what happened to Charlie Kirk, and part of me, and I think this is something that is deep down in every man, began to say, I would lay down my life for these principles, for these truths about masculinity. And that hit something that I perhaps buried and was scared about. I was scared about putting my head above the parapet and saying, no, this is what men must do. And look around us, look at how society is collapsing and burning. And the only thing that's going to rescue it is good manhood, because men have been created to build. And funnily enough, I don't know, I looked at this morning's readings. I don't know if you did. And it's Ezra, where after the exile of the Jews from the Promised Land under Cyrus, king of Persia, he welcomes them back and makes a proclamation through the kingdom. I'm reading off my phone here, to rebuild God's house in Jerusalem. And he puts out a call to everyone. He says, all among you, whoever is among you, may his God be with him, and let him go to Jerusalem and rebuild the house of the Lord. What really struck me, however, was then rose up the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and they go and rebuild. And I thought, today of all days, when we're going to be talking about this, and when I've been thinking, when it was Charlie Kirk's remembrance today, and his wife says very much the same to men. I say to all of you men, she said, you be the spiritual leaders, be good fathers, be good husbands. Today of all days, that reading comes up, and the call to the heads of the families, the fathers, to go and rebuild. That's what men are meant to be doing. And I think that is the essential purpose of Catholic Man UK. That we need to be encouraging every man to go out and rebuild, starting with himself, rebuild himself, or rebuild his marriage, rebuild his family, or rebuild his society in whatever environment he's in. So yeah, very stirring stuff, very good stuff.
It's fascinating because we're living in a culture, as you say, that where we are forced in our roles as breadwinners to some extent to compromise with the culture, aren't we? You've got, I mean, it's well documented now. Perhaps we're at the zenith of that trajectory, and it will start to crumble from this point on. Certainly, if you keep in touch with what's going on in the film industry, there's been this trajectory to swap out all the male heroes with female heroes, to make all the idea of heroism is compromised with sin and darkness. So any heroes that there are anti-heroes, with sort of a brokenness to them. And so we've been pumped. When you look back on the old films, I was saying to my son, we were watching Ben-Hur, the old 1958 version or whatever it is, 1960 version, and just every conversation in that film was inspiring. Every time two characters come together, the dialogue was electrifying compared to the absolute rubbish that we've got now. And I find when I go to Catholic Man UK that it's so stirring, nothing more than to be in a room full of Catholic men we're all having these conversations. This is all what we're talking about, all the right stuff. And just that on its own is encouraging and electrifying and dynamic, isn't it?
It is, and I think we can kind of track back and see how men have been pushed away from every masculine space, and starting with the family, then with the church, then with our space as spiritual heads, then with our public and private spaces, and it was interesting when I was my younger brother was in the Scouts, and I was a Scout leader at the time, when we opened the doors to girls. And I think the Scouts have fallen apart as an organisation since then. But very interestingly, the Guides never opened the door to boys. And now the Guides, if you look on their website, see themselves as the premier organisation for women for females, and they've retained that boundary around it being a female organization. But every space that we as men occupy has been kind of vilified, looked on with suspicion. Why is it that you guys all want to be around together? Well, that's all a bit weird. And so we've been atomized and isolated. And I think that divide and conquer has been a real mission from the devil, from Satan, because once you disperse the men, he can just stride in through the door because there's no one standing firm. If you think back to the story when Adam and Eve were shifted out from the Garden of Eden, what does God do but post an angel with a flaming sword, if I remember rightly, at the gates, and uses the same word to the angel, Shema, guard, that he used to Adam when he asked Adam to protect the garden, and Adam clearly failed, and so God had to put an angel there to do the same thing. And we've, for one way or another, we've been put to sleep at our posts, and we've been even dismissed from our posts. And I think we really, really need to open our eyes and minds and hearts as men and go, oh, hang on, this is looking scarily dangerous. And if we don't rouse ourselves now, we've opened the door to, well, we have already opened the door to things coming in, but we're going to be slaughtered from inside if we don't rouse ourselves pretty quickly.
Well, and I think Catherine's talk, like Catherine was the first woman to speak at Catholic Man UK last year, wasn't she? And she gave a brilliant talk about the fact that women need men to stand up and take that role. Thanks be to God, and I think that it's almost like stuff we never hear anymore. That's what I find so, frustrating. But it was great, I think, for the boys to hear it from Catherine. The girl.
Yeah, there's no it's not, you don't lose, women don't lose, they only gain. You need men to be strong, you need men to provide and to protect and to lead and to be spiritual head of the family. We do need that. And like you say, we're in a situation where we don't say it, we don't hear it. We're not, with a crisis of leadership, we know we're not hearing it even from the church. And as I said, that's why it was so refreshing to hear Charlie Kirk speaking so plainly. I know he's not the only one, but that I often think sometimes we wrap things up, that real eloquence and erudition and qualifications and experts. And I think sometimes it's just really basic, simple things that we get wrong. So we've almost become really good at all the complex stuff, and we're kind of competing with each other to outdo one another with our intellects. But we've lost the simple things. It's really simple. Boys and girls are different. Girls need boys not to be like them, but to be boys, to be men. And when they are men, that's a win for everyone. That's great for women, and then women can be women. But once that crumbles, I'm a big critic of feminism. But I think feminism, women have done this because they have felt that men have stepped away from, like, once the church crumbles, once you elevate man above God and you say God's not in charge, we are, then men don't place themselves under God, then women won't place themselves under man, and so the whole ordering is wrong. So we have to start by having men placing themselves under God, and then when they do that and they speak in that way where they respect women and they don't use them and abuse them, and they respect their dignity, then women, I would say, are very happy to place themselves under that mission of a man who places himself under Christ. I mean, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. You can't get a mission you'd rather place yourself under than someone who is willing to lay down his life and give his last drop of blood for love of you. What's not to like, but if you get that wrong, then of course you get all that perversion that Mark talked about, the perverted heroes and the women defenders. And
I think we have also lost a real understanding of the interplay between man and woman. And barriers, divisions are drawn. The men are from Mars, women are from Venus, whole thing. And Catherine, this is something that we're going to be exploring at the talk at the Brompton Oratory, aren't we?
Yeah.
And that sense that the man provides this framework for the ecosystem to work, and the woman is there right at the heart of it, giving it life, giving it drive, giving it momentum, giving the meaning to the framework that the man has put into place. And I think we've lost that sense that society needs both, not to the detriment of either one. And I think when one starts to do, like the man starts to overlay and go, this is what it must look like, and then the woman steps back and goes, whoa, hang on a minute, we lose that kind of, like a dance, we lose that sense of the interplay between both of them. Or if the woman comes in and goes, this is how I want things to be, and the man goes, oh, fine then, you do it like that, we lose that kind of sense of how she enlivens and ennobles what the framework is. And I think that's something that we need to go back to in our conversations with men and women, and go, please, let's just try to understand how what you do influences what I do, and vice versa, because that unity, that one flesh, and what's Charlie's missus' name, Erica Kirk, she ends her call to men, that the memorial today or yesterday, whenever it was, with that very thing, you are one flesh. And I think we really need to dig deep into what it means to be one flesh. It's quite striking when you see stories in the Bible where the household has come together to do something. And often it refers to the head of the household saying, we've decided to do this, we're going to make a stand for the Lord, Joshua or whatever. And it refers then to the children and the servants. But the wife isn't referred to. And I think because both he and his wife are standing there as one person going, as for me and my household, me being me in one union, because it's so striking that the wife isn't mentioned with the rest of the household. And I think we need to look into these things and go, okay, so what's the underlying narrative here? Oh, the wife's been written out of the picture. No, she hasn't. How do we understand one flesh? And how do we understand that interplay between the man and the woman? One cannot work without the other. Some people talk about the head and the heart, and I think we'll sort of maybe look at something about that, Catherine, when we talk to the people at Brompton Oratory. But we are missing some really, really nuanced discussions between men and women that really need to start happening.
Yeah. I mean, we'll get into that when we talk together in a week or so at the Oratory. But I think one of the challenges you must face in the modern world is that there are so many young men who are from broken homes themselves. It's hard, and it probably was hard enough when there was a tighter knit family, and you had fathers present. But now you're having young men who don't have a role model, who don't have fathers. That's very difficult, isn't it? I was just at a wedding, just a quick anecdote. I was at a wedding just this weekend, and it was a secular wedding, and it was in a registry office, and I was complaining to Mark because it was, I ended up praying because I started off moaning, and I thought, just pray, don't whinge. But there was a young lad whose single mother was on my table, almost boasting about having left her husband to lead the life she wants. And there's this young boy who was 17, and he was talking to children who aren't used to hearing this sort of thing about all the boys he's kissed and the girls he's kissed, and it's all to be celebrated, and isn't this brilliant? I just thought, that poor lad, he's got no father, he doesn't know what he's about. He's probably just been told life is about pleasure seeking, avoid pain, seek pleasure, and he's doing just that. And then so my instinct was to be annoyed and think, oh, this is rotten, and I don't want my kids anywhere near it. But then I just started praying for the mother and the son, because I thought they're just part of this whole broken mess, and this poor young lad is going to be churned out. And what hope has he got? It's the brokenness that you're dealing with, isn't it?
Very much, and that moves into adulthood as well. So that I work with a number of men who I mentor or perhaps life coach, and you can see the long-standing effects of the trauma that they've had one way or another linked to their childhood, where more often than not, the father has been absent. And what that's done at a very, very early stage is give them a twisted sense of life, of self, of other. And what they're trying to do then is to navigate through what appears to be their reality. That is how the world is. And when I work with them, that sort of having to try and unpick, no, that's not quite how life is, leaves them very, very disorientated. And it's because it goes so deeply into their psyche, into adulthood, you realize that actually you've got a real tough job to do with men as they move from childhood to adulthood, who are trying to operate in the world out there and can't. They can't function. They can't function properly. They don't know why they can't function. So sort of going back to the purpose of Catholic Man UK, we do sense that we need to go back to the younger men, and in even trying to go back to 18 to 25-year-olds, you're probably dealing with young men who are really, really struggling to understand the world and themselves and how they coexist. It's a tough old gig out there. And I think going back to my hesitancy that Mark noticed a couple of years ago, part of it is that, because it's a real, I mean, we use the word battle, don't we? And perhaps we use it lightly, but it's going to be a real tough job out there to help men understand what it is their purpose is, because it's been so battered and deadened, and it's indistinguishable now for a lot of men what they are meant to be.
This is my
last
fury.
time I took the Brompton Oratory, someone had brought a friend along. I think it was a young lady brought a male friend who was gay. I don't know how much it sort of was immersed in the lifestyle, but he came along and he listened, but he had to leave. And she said, yeah, I'm so sorry. He left early because he said, I'm going to have to go home and reevaluate my whole life. You know, if the purpose of masculinity is fulfilled in fatherhood or paternity to some extent, you know, the cogs in his brain just kind of crunched together and ground to a halt, and he just needed to leave and rethink his life. Now that's one small example in one set of circumstances. Yeah, I think we are dealing with a real pandemic of a loss of manhood, and we just don't understand what that means.
No, but like in one sense, obviously it's extremely complex, but in another sense, it's really simple, and I think there is a level at which you can just sort of engage with it when we're all together like that and speaking about our faith, and which is just amazing. But this is my fury with it, Sam, is that you know, when you're talking there about like just this is stuff the church teaches. This is what the Catholic Church teaches about marriage and manhood. Well, you never hear any of it. You know, like where are we getting any of that from? And now we're in the absolute pits. You know, we had a chat with Brian Holdsworth a couple of weeks ago, and he's since then, I don't know if you saw, Catherine, but he's released a video which is basically like that conversation, a lot of the talking points. And one of the things that we were speaking about was, where's this resurgence of Christianity come from? And, you know, I was suggesting that because Pope Francis was so bad, you know, for a lot of Catholics, we pulled our boots on and we got out there and we started going, no, this is what the church teaches and it's brilliant. You know, it's not confusing or anything like that. And that is, you know, Brian was saying that is what is created this resurgence of Christianity, because people are going online, young guys are going online and going, oh, wow, this is actually really good, because, you know, people who love the faith are on there doing it. And that's what, there's a sense in which that is what is needed. And like you say, even though it's a massive mountain we have to climb, we've got to start at the foothills, haven't we? And just getting together like that heals so many wounds in such a, you know, strong way. It's really powerful work, and I really would encourage anyone watching who can make it to the conference, you know, to come along.
I suspect, Mark, that because the time is so ripe, that doors are going to be blown open, blown off their hinges, and you can see it in the wake of Charlie Kirk's death. The numbers of people who said, I'm going back to church. I've picked up a Bible for the first time, that I think there is going to be, where I said, okay, it's been so difficult. Men have grown up with such traumatic lives. They psychologically don't know where they stand. I think there's going to be like a cruise missile coming straight through, blowing that open, and they'll suddenly go, oh my word, why didn't I see this before? And I think me certainly doubts the power of Christ. And certainly at this time when there is so much confusion, he can just pierce through all of that in a way that we're never going to understand. And I think that's the sense of hope that I need to have. And just going back to your point, Mark, of when we convene as men for our men's conference, and you can feel the ripples through the room. And, I said last time round that I guaranteed the men within 2 hours of being there, they would be opening their hearts about their lives, their marriages, their upsets, whatever it would be. And they do. You can see within a couple of hours, they're breaking off into small groups and they're opening themselves up. I think, again, we really underestimate that power of simply being alongside another man in a truly platonic sense of brotherhood. The media will have us say that men don't open up, that men aren't emotional enough, that men don't sort of let out their feelings. But we know from our experience, don't we, Mark, that we just have to sit around a fire with a pint and feel comfortable in another man's presence. And that is medicinal to a degree that we don't understand.
Yeah, so valuable. And also just being in a room with 40 blokes praying together or singing together,
Yeah.
Is, incredibly cathartic, isn't it? So it's brilliant, really worth doing.
Yeah.
And we've noticed a few younger men coming along, your lads come along, and that intergenerational convention is also very good for the soul. At many levels, you see the young men coming through, to hear from them, to sense their vitality and their zeal, or to watch them listening to the older guys and hearing of their experience. And I think, again, we've missed that, that primordial sitting around the fire and swapping stories, mending the fishing nets, or skinning the deer, where lots subconsciously is taught and learnt, and where there we feel as men that we have purpose. And again, this is going to hit right at the heart of who we are as men. More of it, really.
Well, that's interesting. That I was listening earlier to a conversation about teen rebellion and saying in the West we just take this attitude, well, teens are going to rebel, that's just the way life is, they're going to drink, they're going to pick up bad habits, they're going to go and sleep around. You can't do anything about that, they'll come good in the end. And the guy that was talking was saying, well, this is an aberration, actually. What the way teens are in the West and the rebelliousness that we just say is part of life and we have to accept it, isn't really the case and hasn't really been the case across the world and in generations before, because there's been these rites of passage. Like you were saying, you're sitting around at a fire, you're going fishing, you're skinning whatever it might be, but you get men, young men get together with older men, and they have a rite of passage and they're given more responsibility and they take that on, and then they don't fill that void of that tension between childhood and adulthood with testing the boundaries, pushing the boundaries, going out, getting drunk and everything, and seeking pleasure. It's about, again, it's the right ordering of those natural instincts. And that's something, as you say, you've already said, is so lost. There's so few spaces for men to just be with other men, for boys to be with other boys. My sons have been involved in some of the stuff that Opus Dei do, which are really some of the only male-only spaces that are even left anymore. As you say, Scouts has gone. So, and they've been really good. I must credit Opus Dei with their formation for young men and for young women separately, is really, really necessary. So there are pockets in the church that are doing good work, but it's often, you have to find out about it. It's quite quietly done. It's not coming from the centre. It's not coming from the leaders in the church.
It has foxed us slightly that men's groups don't naturally spring up. And I was talking to one that has recently set up in Wellingborough, And it's been driven by a great guy who has a proper vision for it. But I went to speak to them, and I think we sort of acknowledge that to some extent men's groups are artificial in the way that we're doing it. We're sort of bringing men round a table in a parish hall for a cup of tea, and that's not really how men's groups or men's groupings, let's say, worked. It would have been around a defined task, a task that was related to the building of the man, the family, society, and had an inherent purpose. And I think there is a bit of a struggle that while men's groups seem to be very attractive things to join, and certainly within the church, I think men are kind of perhaps subconsciously questioning, what's the point? What is it we're meant to be doing here? And that's possibly a question that we need to tackle. Can we encourage men to be doing something around the building of the life of the parish? We did try with my men's group some years ago to be looking at things like mowing the lawns, redecorating, repair, being the fire warden, those kinds of things. And in this day and age, it also bumps up against the stuff you have to do for your own family and your own children.
Yeah.
So we are missing an ecosystem where things like men's groups come naturally together around some particular task. So I think that needs some more discussion. But that's not to say you shouldn't do a men's group. I think they are vital. And it does need someone who's willing to have that vision and step in and go, right, lads, come together and let's make it once a month, and let's make it scheduled, and let's put it in the diary. Everyone knows that it's supposed to be there, and let's have a little bit of a program. So, it is a bit artificial, but that needs of it, but I think we need to think about it a lot more, how it should look, how it should work.
Is that also part of the breakup of the family as well? Because that would have been, not only is the family broken up, what you would do with your father and his brothers, your uncles, and his father, your grandfather, and maybe if you're fortunate, even if people had children younger, maybe your great grandfather, and that's the natural. And so you have to do this artificial thing. It's great what you're doing, but I can really see that you've kind of got to construct this artificially because it's not something that's happening naturally in families through generations. At the same time, we are bumping off the elderly, sticking them in care homes, ignoring them, and we don't value our elderly. We don't see the elderly as being able to pass on wisdom and tradition. We just say when they get old and smelly, let's just ignore them. So there's a few things like in the West that have just come together like this perfect storm to just, it does force you to have to create this artificially because the natural conditions aren't there.
Very much, very much. And I think other instances such as the insistence that we have to send our kids to university, while there's very much good to be said about educating oneself to the furthest extent possible, and it works if you're going to be a surgeon or an engineer. I look at how my own siblings are thoroughly dispersed. And I'm looking at my own children who haven't gone to university, aren't going to university, and are still around. Or one of my boys has gone to Sandhurst. That's a whole other thing. But my daughter, who's 21, is still living at home, but she is thoroughly independent with her own job and her car and her own social life, and yet she's still very close. And my wife's sisters are close to us as well. And you begin to see what we've lost by again atomizing the family and insisting that we throw our kids out as soon as possible and they go as far away as possible and they don't disturb us because we've got a cruise to go on. I think we can see that so much of our environment has unraveled and we think that's normal. We think it's how life should be. And we're only beginning to see that actually we've created some huge problems for ourselves.
So if people want to hear more about this, Sam, they can catch you at Brompton Oratory. What are the dates?
So we're there with the Brompton Oratory's young adults group, young professional students, next Saturday, this coming Saturday, the 27th. And the theme is going to be on the marriage proposal. And we're looking at the marriage proposal in the context of let's say, a business proposal, that it's not just some romantic gesture that symbolizes my long-term commitment to you, but that actually the man should step back and see this as a much bigger thing, and say, look, here is the framework for our life together in all of these areas. And I have understood clearly my mission from God, and I'm transmitting it to you, the woman, in all its clarity, as I understand it, according to my own strengths and talents and characteristics. And I want you to come in and fill this framework with vitality and empower it so that life comes forth to its fullest. And I think what I've not done over the years is looked at, I've talked about the interplay. I've always talked to men about being men, and actually the true understanding of manhood comes in the context of womanhood. The woman really shows us what it means fully to be a man through husbandhood and fatherhood. And if we can navigate things like, or words like, obedience and submission and headship and all those sorts of things, I think we can get back to what we were talking about earlier, this understanding of how one flesh really and truly operates in an equitable and spiritual manner.
Yeah, and to see that you're it's suicide. Actually, you really are one flesh. So the idea that this is impermanent and can end at some point of inconvenience down the line when you get irritated with each other it should be counted amongst suicide figures. That's how it should be seen. I just think, okay, so you're killing that.
So then we've got the Catholic Man UK conference coming up in November, and that's the 16th of November, is it?
14th to 16th, yes.
And can we book that on the website?
We can book it on the website. Yes, there is a booking page. You'll need to scroll down, quite far down actually, to events, and you'll see a link to there. It being a new page, we haven't fully optimized it, but there we go. And that will take you to ticketing form. We had a slight issue with it today. That's going to be resolved tomorrow. But yeah, it's live. It's ready to go.
Brilliant.
That's a really bright new colours you got there, Sam. That green's garish, isn't it?
We sort of riffed off sports and gym and personal trainer websites.
Actually it does have that look. Yeah,
deliberately so. And if you scroll,
Catherine's always on sports and training websites, so she's very familiar with that vibe.
Yeah.
And
there is a necessity, isn't there, that we as men are quite happy to dedicate our time and effort and energy to pumping ourselves up. And I think we need to do the same thing to our sense of manhood, husbandhood, fatherhood.
Amen.
Amen. Excellent. Well, so you and I will be talking Saturday this week, me with the girls, you with the boys, and then you've got your men's conference. So if you're watching and you've not heard of Catholic Man UK, this is the first time, go and check out the website, book a place on the conference. It will be great. And if you have heard of them and have been before, I'm sure you'll want to go again. So go, build, as artificial as it might have to be now, only until it becomes natural, and then we have you plant the seeds, and then this is for the future, isn't it? Let the fruit grow.
And we welcome people getting in touch. There is real power, as Mark was saying, in face-to-face relationship. So get in touch.
It's not just for Catholics, is it?
No, of course not.
Obviously it's Catholic, but
yeah, we've had a couple of Muslims coming along to some of our events. Slightly incognito, but they have come along.
Brilliant. Okay, right, all you Muslims, get in touch with Catholic Man UK and convert, which of course, and all the rest of you. And thanks for coming on and joining us, Sam. I'll see you at the end of the week, and that's it from us. Do visit catholicunscripted.com, pick up a subscription where you can read all our articles and watch all our videos and interviews ad-free. That's the best way to support us. But for now, thanks for watching. I'm Catherine Bennett.
And I'm Mark Lambert.
Thank you for having me.